Welcome everyone and a new interview with indie developers. This time I have an interview with Max from Time on Frog Island, and he is going to tell us anything about his new game, Time on Frog Island. Max, welcome in the studio. Could you introduce yourself shortly?
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm the designer, game director for Half Past Yellow, and Time on Frog Island's our most recent release. It just came out last week. For the most part, I did the sort of head of the design stuff, but then also a lot of the secondary coding. Basically, responsible for all the things that are broken in the game, because I'm the less experienced programmer.
Okay, nice. Okay, so if we have some complaints, then we need to go to
you.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Most of the bugs that have been reported are linked to systems that I made, so that's always good to know.
Ouch. Okay. So because you just launched the game at this moment a few weeks ago. So how do they look like? Trying to fix all the bugs, or is it a bit relaxing, or how is it? How's that time?
Well, so it's not a game as a service. So it's not like we've gone straight into a sort of service maintenance plan where we have updates coming and new quests and new frogs and stuff. That's not the type of game that it is. So actually what we're doing at the moment is we released the game, we took a step back. We're actually prototyping ideas for what we're going to do next. But we're also sort of engaging with the community on Discord, and we're having a lot of meetings with the publisher and just sort of aligning the patches that we will do. We probably we will be doing a quality of life patch improvement. Some of the things that we notice a lot of players doing, there are definitely a few fixes for that, not bugs, but more design bugs that we've noticed.
Yeah, like a map, it would be nice.
We won't have a map. That's not quality of life improvements that we're gonna add. A map and a quest log is actually, we can talk about it a little bit more, but it kind of goes against the ethos of what we think is the most interesting in the game, and kind of how the game is designed. But other quality of life improvements, sort of a little bit more direction from the frogs themselves, if you sort of speak to them a little bit more and or show them some items that aren't linked to their quest, but maybe either are partially linked to their quest or linked to another frog's quest. We kind of want to do a little bit more direction there. And there's also some bugs that have popped up in our Discord and people messaging us on Twitter and stuff that we've essentially just listed, and that'll also be, we'll probably do one patch which is bugs and then another patch which is quality of life kind of improvements and features. But that's the plan, but it's not we're currently working on it right now, panic. There was one issue with an achievement which we did hotfix, but other than that it's fine.
Yeah, the achievements were a bit random because when you walk on your ship then you see those signs, right? But I didn't really...
Yeah, essentially one of the key things that we find interesting about the game is sort of the sailor has this goal when they land on the island to sort of fix their ship and leave. And we direct the player and the sailor on that goal. But part of what makes the game interesting is that we as developers want to kind of distract the player as much as possible so that they spend more time on the island. We're trying to sort of make that experience of the sailor sort of becoming more familiar with the island. We're trying to essentially have that be very visible to the player in gameplay, because if you do either know the quests or look up guides, you can run through the game very quickly, sort of finding all the boat pieces and just leaving. But part of what we find is interesting is sort of interacting with the frogs, building the small house that you can build, doing the different things on the island which aren't required for completing the game or seeing the credits. So actually that achievement bubble on the ship is more to signal to players that there's more to do. If they do sort of run through the game really quickly, just getting the ship parts, just when they're about to leave, they'll be oh, what are these other things that I could do, build a house? And so that was kind of signaling towards that. But the achievements in Steam and PlayStation, Xbox and Switch, just the achievements page we have, they are taken from those little pop-ups. It's not to list all the achievements there. That was just to show some of the most interesting things we think about the game, like the races that are hidden and things like that.
Yeah, the races are very random. Sometimes I was I think maybe a few I kind of grasp it, but yeah, what is the reason behind? Because it's color code, right?
It's color, but also visual. The patterns on the little race pads have a 1, a 2, and a 3, sort of almost like a paw print on them. And then the corresponding end gate has a print. One of the things which is a little bit problematic with them is if you start one the first time you see it and sort of don't know what you're doing, then it sort of runs down the timer. We couldn't really figure out a good way to sort of end it. Maybe running back through the gate could end it. That's something that we'll probably look into fixing. Yeah, the idea was sort of it's almost like a point-to-point race with many different ways to complete it. We've timed it it under certain circumstances, like using the speed flowers or something like that. But there's actually a lot of different ways to get from point A to point B. And once you know where the start and end gate is, it can be quite fun to complete those.
Yeah, it's really a game that you need to find out different things out of your own to do, like, for example, grabbing a flower and then you suddenly have that speed, or just in the beginning I was like running around a lot because, well, trying to figure out the map. But what was the start of the game? Like, were you like, I want to be on a frog island? Like, wait, why frogs? Like, what's the reason behind?
So frogs are actually, that was a little bit of a random decision, like just from a point of view of, we didn't do market research, which I think is a bit surprising because we're releasing alongside like 100 other frog games, or like a bunch of other games using frogs or in development. It wasn't something that we noticed and sort of like moved towards. It was more, we had the idea for sort of like of a trope game where it's kind of like fish out of water arriving on in an island that you don't know. And we knew we wanted the sailor character. We already had them designed and modeled. That was one of the first assets that went into the game. And we knew we wanted the islanders to be very different, probably anthropomorphic animals. And then we sort of had this question of, is it going to be more like Animal Crossing where you have a cat and a dog and a blah and a blah? Or is it going to be more like, oh, this is an island of ducks or something like that? So our artist was just drawing concepts, and one of the early concept arts they drew was just this like frog eating a sandwich sitting against like a tree, and the sailor was sitting on the other side of the tree just holding their plant. And it was just a really nice little concept art piece, and that was sort of what took us in the direction of frogs initially. And then it was a business decision to make everyone frogs because it made the modeling and animation and rigging and everything a little bit easier. Not as easy as we wanted, but a little bit easier. We basically started from a sort of base frog mesh and then built all the frogs sort of like from that, so it made that process just a little bit faster.
And the axolotl, right?
Yeah, we do have an axolotl. I don't know if you also played the prologue on Steam, but we have like a free prologue demo that's only available on Steam right now. Like, we wanted to sort of build this world where, okay, if this island is Frog Island and you went to another island, it would be some other kind of amphibian or animal. We wanted to do this prologue story, and we chose axolotls, and then we had the axolotl character anyway, the older one. So we styled an axolotl character for our Frog Island, almost as an homage to the prologue we made.
I see, okay. And is this the first game that you published with your team, or is it like...
Sort of. So we did release one game previously called Tiny Tomb, which is a mobile title on Google Play and iOS. But that was a collaboration project between the co-founders of Half Past Yellow before we scaled up, and like one other of our friends. So we started another sort of like secondary company to make that game under, just as kind of protection for everybody. But as the team, it was almost the exact same team that began Time on Frog Island. So it's kind of our second game.
So how big is the team?
So the team is 8 now. So we started as the 4 co-founders on Time on Frog Island, and then after getting the publishing deal with Merge, that allowed us to sort of like upscale slightly. Well, I say slightly, it's 100%, but it's 4 people. And we're 8 now, where we got an extra artist, and we have some sound team. Actually, 2 artists and sound designers.
And you are now in your office, right?
Yeah. Right now I'm in the office. So we're a semi-remote company, actually. So we have 5 members of the team in Copenhagen. So we have an office for 5 people, and then we have one of our artists is remote from Finland. Our composer and sound designer are both remote from Macedonia.
Oh, wow, that's a very like multicultural bunch that you have there.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's funny because we're in Denmark, we're in Copenhagen, but we have one Dane out of the... Well, technically it's 2 Danes because the guy living in Finland is Danish, but we have a Dane, and then I'm from Scotland, Remy is from the Netherlands, Jean is from Italy, Hannah is from America, Kasper's from Denmark, Goran and Nino are both from Macedonia. So it's like, yeah, it's pretty diverse, at least from European countries' office.
Yeah, that helps most likely with all the Easter eggs, because I think I found a few, but what are your favorite Easter eggs in the game?
So we don't have too many, like, or maybe there's some that we accidentally put in there almost. I think my favorite is probably the Wilson, the Castaway volleyball. So like in Castaway, Tom Hanks has the volleyball that they sort of put their handprint on, and they call Wilson. So actually we have a little plant that it's like a volleyball with a little stick in it that washes up on the beach on one of the other islands, and that's probably one of my favorite ones because it's just kind of like, I think people get it quite quickly if they know the movie, but I guess not.
I was like, what is this?
The Wilson thing I like a lot. I don't know if we actually got around to putting it in, but we wanted to put a little Easter egg where like when you leave the island at the end of the game and you take your plant with you. I don't know if we actually put it in, but we wanted to have it be possible to also put the Wilson plant in instead. So like leave, like almost as a joke, sort of like leave the actual plant behind and use the Wilson plant instead.
But what do I do with the Wilson plant? Because I tried to put it in the ground, but it didn't. I mean, it's just there, but it didn't really do something.
Yeah, no, it doesn't do anything. It was just a sort of like little, I guess, Easter egg for the movie. And the reason we even created the asset at all was, again, for the prologue. So we weren't going to do a demo at all, but actually we sort of figured out with the Steam Next Fest and how that works and how it's good for, mostly pretty good for developers and stuff. We decided to make a demo, but because our game is so open and all the sort of like quests crisscross each other and this type of stuff, it didn't make sense to like time gate things or make a small sort of subset of the island with less frogs or something like that. I think it would really feel unpolished and unfinished. So we decided to essentially like game jam out a second game. Like we already had all the tech, so we just sort of made one additional character, the shaman axolotl, and then a ton of different sort of like textures and stuff to make the island feel different. And then we just created a new island with a slightly separate story. It takes about 20 to 40 minutes to complete. And the Wilson plant was made for that. Because we made all this content, we thought, okay, anything we make for the prologue, we should see if we can use it for the main game. So it doesn't feel like 6 weeks of wasted time. It wouldn't be wasted, but it feels like we're still working on the main game. So even though we take 6 weeks out from the main game, we only lose, say, 4 weeks because 2 weeks of the work can be transferred. That was the idea behind it, at least.
Where are you the most proud of?
I think it's probably the thing I have the least input in. It's probably just the art style. I think is very, very cool, and we've had a lot of great response to the art style. I mean, you can tell kind of what we're inspired by with things like Legend of Zelda Wind Waker and stuff like that. But for sure, I think it's a little bit different from what you see in that game, and we sort of like essentially put our own stamp on that sort of like toon art style, and I think it's just really nice, like really cool. I mean, that was mostly like Remy doing the shader work and Casper sort of doing the early sort of like style focus and figuring out the 2D drawings he was making was transferring to 3D and everything. But I think that is just amazing, and hopefully similar to Wind Waker itself, it's like timeless almost. Hopefully the game doesn't look any worse like 10 years from now because it's stylized in a way to hold up.
Yeah, I think it's stylized. It's quite cute. There was one person on the live stream, and he just was wondering like why are you running with smoke behind it? It's a maybe silly question, but I just wanted to ask it for him.
Yeah, I mean that's just the sort of like running dust particles. Just this fun little piece of juice. We've had comments on Twitter think maybe there's too much dust particles from the running, but yeah, that was something that was set early. I think if we were to look at super early builds, the sailor wouldn't be very different. Like the sailor's character model, the little run animation and everything like this, that was one of the first things that we worked on, and the character controller and stuff. And I think visually you would be almost surprised how exactly the same the character looks and plays and feels even a year ago. It's everything else. It's the island, it's the quest, it's all the frogs that we made, it's everything else that's sort of like taken that time and refinement and everything. But the sailor, we sort of came to this very early conclusion of what we wanted them to look like, and it's just sort of like driven the whole visual and style of the game.
Was it in the beginning already that you were like, I want quests based on like the daytime, or like it's raining, sunny, or whatsoever?
It wasn't so much that we wanted them to sort of be based around that. It was just sort of like in my mind, because we're a small team, it's sort of like if you're gonna build these systems, it's better to use these systems. I actually think that it's one of the things that we didn't explore as much as we could have. There's definitely some things on the cutting room floor which are linked more to things like time of day and weather that we thought would be sort of like fun to include, but ultimately it was not feasible to kind of like do it with the time that we had. But it was always a sort of idea of, okay, if we're going to put all this work into a sort of weather system, even though it's a simple one where it just sort of like chooses sun or rain, it still added a lot into, okay, how does the post-process work, and how does that change when it's raining, and what do the particle effects do, and how is rain going to work, and how is the sound of the rain going to work, and how do we structure all this? So if we're going to put all that work into making it like rain, we should probably use it for something that's not just visual. But we ultimately didn't actually push it as far as we could have, because the same goes for the day and night stuff. I think in the main game, day and night, the day and night cycle is used, as in like you have to wait for things, but I don't think there's things that are like only active at night in terms of like actual quest based stuff.
They're randomly dodos, but it's like, well, what is the idea behind that? Because well, they're mostly just annoying. But if the dodo eggs, like, did you suddenly have a sticking tongue with dodos? Like, what's the coloration?
Well, the dodo thing with the sticky tongue was more, it was meant to feel like almost like a Yoshi egg from Mario, and then you get like a Yoshi tongue style thing. So it's not, obviously the eggs come from the dodo, but the eggs themselves are sort of styled after that Yoshi egg. But yeah, actually, so the little critters like the tadpups and the dodos and the crabs, those were like very fun to make and just sort of like add this extra piece of life to the world. And the dodos we just thought would be super interesting to, like, have this breakable item and they sort of chase you down and try and get you just to sort of like navigate this space with all these like silly birds coming at you.
I was just throwing them from the cliff though, but
that's also, I mean, we don't judge. we don't judge the players. It says more about you than it does about us. That's obviously a valid solution. If you can't get through the gauntlet of birds coming at you, then you can just kind of toss them off the cliff and
like, what is behind the ice thing? Because that was kind of random.
The idea behind the sort of like potions or the brewing part of it was to sort of have a way for the player to kind of like become a little bit more like a frog and use the abilities are also not required to finish the game, but they sort of like make traversal a little bit easier. But in terms of the actual like the ice flower that you get, that's just for the quest. Like that's just for the hermit and the acolyte characters who like ask for the drink. I think if you drink it, maybe the friction gets lower, but it's almost unnoticeable. I don't actually know if we're doing anything with the ice effect, but we do have like low gravity effect and also speed boost effect and stuff like that if you use like the other ingredients.
At least I was happy that you don't really lose them, because I was afraid that if I drink another drink that I will lose my ability.
No, yeah, it's a little bit strange. There are some abilities, or there are permanent abilities, which is the jumping and the frog tongue, and also the ability to sort of like croak, but then the other ones are all timed, like the low gravity and the speed boost and stuff like that.
In the beginning I was afraid like, I needed a dodo egg for a tongue, and then I was like, no, but I don't want to lose the other thing, and I was like, no, and then okay, I'm making it, and then it seems that I didn't lose my tongue, so at least that was joy. So
No, for sure. The other ones that are timed are more for like, so getting some achievements or maybe completing races faster and this type of stuff. It's just kind of a different way to get around the island. It's like a multiplier that it modifies. So we also had a bug in our Jira, which was like, oh, if you drink 10 of the speed boost potions, then you like go so fast you can't control the character. And we're like, not a bug. So that's if players can
you need to have a lot of patience, that's for sure.
Yeah, but you can pour lots of drinks from one potion, so you just need a lot of glasses. That's the only thing. If you find a lot of glasses, you can pour a bunch.
But the inventory is like one thing, so if you want to...
Yeah, but then you sort of pick it up, drink it, put it down, pick up another one, drink it, put it down, pick up another one, drink it, put it down, and so on and so on. That's always the sort of mind of testers, kind of seeing where the limits can be. Yeah. But they're like actively trying to break your game, whereas players, they also do that, but it's not in the same way.
Yeah. And what was your target audience?
I think for us, target audience was probably a little bit older than the game initially like kind of perceives. For us, like a lot of the inspiration, like just for the game in general, came from a lot of old school games, PlayStation 1 and SNES games and stuff like that, and N64 games. They are a little bit less handholdy and they sort of drop you in this space, and it's very much about figuring out your own sort of like place within the space. And I think that type of game leans more towards people and players who have played that. It's almost like a nostalgic experience, maybe. I think even though it's appropriate for children, like it has a 3+ rating, it's not necessarily for children. It's a game that almost any kid could pick up and enjoy as a toy, but possibly not progress through the story and the game in the same way. So actually the target audience is skewing upwards. It's more in the late 20s, early 30s, because the game is also not super long. So it's sort of like a 1 evening or a 2 evening game, depending on how much time you have, or if you have kids or something like like this. So our target audience was definitely skewing more in that direction. It also has a little bit of this wholesome appeal, like even though it's not quite the same as some of the other games you see in the wholesome sort of ecosystem, it definitely has that sort of cutesy style and these little interactions that I think lend itself to that almost chill and relaxing games. Like, it can be frustrating at times, hopefully mostly in a good way, but just the idea of no pressure and this type of stuff I think leans well into this chill and relaxing games. You can sort of just take your time on the island and sort of wander around, and actually that's very much where the ethos of the design comes from. We were interested in you sort of like crash landing in this place, having no information really about the island and the inhabitants and where things are. And then as you adventure around the island, you put things together, like create a mental map, understand where things are, learn the differences between the frogs based on color, shape, size, this type of stuff. And of course, it's different for different players how good you are at like mental mapping spaces. But the goal is that the island is small enough, you know, if you spend enough time there, you're sort of like, the farm is to the south of the city, and this is to this, and this is to this.
Yeah, I have the map now printed in my hand.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, I was like running around. I was like, oh, where is this and that? And, are you planning with your team to make a multiplayer?
No. No. It doesn't have the setup for multiplayer. It was actually something the publisher brought up as a sort of like initial question they like to ask all of their possible teams. It's just kind of like, you know, with the fact that on Switch you have the two controllers, it was sort of like, is there the possibility for like a local multiplayer little brother mode or something, you know, like, or like little sibling mode? And it's kind of like, it doesn't quite work the same way, like mostly because of how we've set up all of the camera stuff and everything like that. It was never on our to-do list to have a multiplayer, even as local or definitely not online.
Yeah, because that's one of the first questions you ask when it's on the Switch, right?
Yeah, I think definitely it's nice with the Switch to have that type of ability to just be able to pass the controller over, especially because with our game you play it with the two Joy-Cons, but there's so few buttons that we use that actually you could play it with one. Like, it's just sort of stick and then 3 buttons or something. Realistically, we could have done it with 2 Joy-Cons or like with a single Joy-Con, but it was just never our plan to do multiplayer.
And how did you find your publisher? Or like, how did you push your game into the world?
It was a bit strange for us because, like I said, we sort of released a game previously, but it was a mobile game. It was a very different experience to what we were trying to make with Time on Frog Island. And we essentially just had a prototype and we were shipping it around to publishers. And we were still working on the prototype, but we essentially were just sending out pitch decks and getting replies from people like, oh, you know, what's the situation here? Or having some questions. Or we got some responses which were sort of like, oh, looks good, but let us know when there's more, or something like that. Or other responses where it just like doesn't fit their catalog. Totally fair. But it was always this sort of like, oh, let us know when there's more, because we're a kind of unproven team. And even though we've got a budget attached to it, it's like a year development. We're looking for development funding. And I think it's always a risk for publishers. We did end up speaking to a couple and ultimately signed with Merge. The way we actually got to Merge was through 2 other publishers. So like we emailed the publisher. They said like, oh, actually this game, like we normally publish things with a higher budget, so we'll send it to this other publisher that we know which it might suit them better. So they sent it forward to this other publisher, CC'd us in the email, and then this publisher was kind of like, oh, that actually doesn't fit our style. But Merge Game, like they were like they were the third in the chain, because I hadn't actually heard of Merge like super in depth before, but when I went to their website, I was like, oh, they did the console porting publishing for Dead Cells and Frostpunk, and oh, they're publishing Alex Kidd.
Frostpunk, but that's totally different game.
Well, yeah, but I think they have a much broader. It's not so much like they have a very narrow portfolio in that way, but it was just interesting to sort of go to their website the first time and be like, oh wow, they've published games that I know, even though I didn't necessarily know the name straight off of the top of my head. But no, we spoke to a couple of publishers. It was ultimately Merge we went with, and we got a deal with them, and it's been a really good relationship working with them. It was actually through working with them, because they're interested in the sort of like physical space and not just the digital space, that the game actually is being released not just digitally on, you know, console and PC at the same time, but also physically. So there's like boxes and stuff that you can find of the game on Switch and PlayStation. And
wait, there are boxes?
I have it. Yeah.
Oh.
So, like we have like, you can find these somewhere in the wild, I guess. But no, you can find like they're on Amazon and signature games and stuff. And the thing is, to me, like just being a small team, I feel like it's more normal for indie games to sort of publish digitally first, and then if it goes well, make physical editions almost as a collector's item. But as I said, like for Merge, they sort of know a lot about this space, so it was important to sort of like have this parallel launch, and it seems to be going super well, which is great. But it was just when they first pitched it, I was kind of like, wow, I'm gonna have a game that's in a box on a shelf, because it's not normal nowadays. And it was like very it was like a moment to kind of like take a breather and be like, whoa.
Nice, really congratulations for that.
Yeah, no, thank you.
So would you have some tips for people that want to start also as an indie studio?
It's always difficult to give really concrete advice, because everyone's like journey in like business journey is like very different. We were actually lucky super early on. The group of us that wanted to start the company together, we were sort of like working to start a company. We were put in touch with a friend of a friend who's like a business advisor. So they helped us with some company setup stuff, still help us with a lot of business stuff. We also were lucky enough that like one of the co-founders, this is why we made Tiny Tomb in the way that we did. One of our co-founders was working just on a project in their spare time, which was Tiny Tomb, that started getting publisher attention because of its sort of visual style that they were posting on Twitter. So as we were starting the company as a group, it was sort of like we were figuring out what our first project was going to be and how we were going to get funding. And they were figuring out, also with one of our co-founders, just in the side project, was kind of like, oh, is this a possible project? Could we find publisher funding? If we do, we need to upscale slightly. So actually that's where the collaboration came in. So we were actually super lucky that basically starting a company, a project, for lack of a better term, almost like fell onto our laps, because one of our co-founders was heavily involved in this sort of like startup indie game of Tiny Tomb. And then we essentially took it forward as a group. Yeah, a little bit of luck on our side there. Then going on from that, we used a little bit of client work and stuff like that. Again, like searching for that. It wasn't client work making games. It was client work making apps. And I guess at the time when we started our company, which is like 4.5 years ago, there was also this shift into like mobile VR for apps and mobile VR for like video players and stuff like that. So actually, because Unity and Unreal and stuff were so far ahead of the game in terms of like VR applications, the best way to implement a VR app, even if it was a silly sort of like point and click thing, was to make it in Unity and not make it in like Java or Android Studio. We actually got a little bit of client work because of that, because we had game engine knowledge and did non-game stuff. It's always difficult to sort of apply our journey or our advice to someone else. I think the main thing for us was just that it's always easier, I guess, I don't know this for a fact, but it feels like it is. It's always easier to go with many, with friends, with partners. Like I don't think as a solo developer, even just from the skills, because I'm not a one-man army in terms of game development, but like as a business owner and stuff, I wouldn't be able to do it. Like it's nice to have a community of people around us essentially help with like wearing different hats, and like if you're having a bad day, someone else can bring you up and vice versa the next day, and this type of stuff. I think having co-founders and basically working in a group that you trust and can trust, that's the main thing for us, for our journey. I think that I wouldn't change, to have those people, that support network.
You told before a bit about your design ethos. Like, what is, like, in short, your design ethos?
Well, I think it's just different per game. For Time on Frog Island, like we sort of wanted to have this almost nostalgic feeling game where players could sort of like jump in and have a very different experience depending on like their knowledge or how they like to interact with games, but also almost in this comedic way be able to fail forward in the game, because there's also this little aspect where you're like, oh, this frog wants this thing, I have no idea where that is, I'm gonna go do something else, and then you like run off, and then you're like, wait a minute, that's that thing that they need, and then you'll sort of like you'll connect dots and work in that way. So a lot of what we wanted for Time on Frog Island came from like that place, but I don't know if like the next game is gonna have a similar or the same design ethos. I mean, as a group, the thing that we're most interested in is just trying something a little bit different with each game that we do. If you do actually look at Tiny Tomb, it's an incredibly different game to what Time on Frog Island is. It's a mobile game, it's sort of tile-based movement, roguelike dungeon crawler, and Time on Frog Island is this almost top-down platformer adventure puzzle game. Our next game, we're currently prototyping some things in first person. I think for us, the thing that we're interested in as a brand and as a company is sort of like creating a name for ourselves that players can trust, that even if the game isn't necessarily for them, hopefully there's a certain level of quality they can attribute to the games. So, and that may draw them, hopefully, to other titles. If they don't normally play racing games, maybe they would try the racing game that we developed at some point in our lives. We might never make a racing game, but that's kind of the idea, but it's early stages, so it could be incredibly wrong. This answer could age poorly.
The studio is called Half Yellow, right? What is the
Half Past Yellow, yeah.
Half Past Yellow, like, what does that mean?
It doesn't really mean anything. We come from a background of we met initially at a lot of game jams, and we just kind of like did quite a few game jams together. We actually haven't done that many recently, which is a shame, and we should kind of like do more of that. But one of the first times that we sort of like got together and worked together was at Nordic Game Jam in 2016 maybe, or 2015, I'm not 100% sure. And like, as you do when you go to your very first game jam, you like completely burn yourself out. You don't do things correctly. Like now when we go to game jams, it's kind of like, 8 hours of sleep every night and do a little bit of work and hang out a lot and just sort of like take your time and relax. It's supposed to be almost like a holiday, but like a creative experience. Whereas then it was kind of like, we gotta make something cool. Oh my God, stay up all night, make. So actually, I mean, we didn't have a name for our team yet, but on the first night when we were conceptualizing and just sort of like banging our heads against the brainstorming wall, one of our friends asked one of our other friends what the time was, and they looked at their wrist. They normally wear a watch, but they weren't wearing a watch at the time. And they looked at their wrist for like actually a little bit too long, like maybe 10 seconds or something. And they were just like, no, I'm not wearing a watch. I don't know what the time is. But the bands for Nordic Game Jam that year were yellow bands, like to show that you were part of the jam. And one of the other team members was just like, oh, it's half past yellow, I guess then. And then
nice.
Doesn't sound super funny. It doesn't sound super funny now, but at the time when you were sleep deprived, it was kind of like, haha, that's kind of funny. That's a good team name. It's almost like one of those classic, haha, that's a great band name kind of moment. And we ended up just taking it forward after the first jam, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a story, man. That's
yeah, it is. It's also why our Twitter has existed since 2015 or something, even though our company has only existed since 2018.
Okay.
So
that was a lot of information. Would you have some less advice that you want to share, or some anecdote or some wisdom with all of us?
No. Thanks a lot for having us, or me, I guess. I keep saying us. It's super nice.
Behind you, there sometimes they're walking.
Just all the team are like under the desk telling me to say things.
Cheering
but,
you.
No, thanks a lot for having me. It's been super nice to talk, and I'm glad you played the game. I'm glad you enjoyed it, hopefully for the most part. But other than that, it's great. Thanks.
It was really nice, and it was really cool to talk with someone who their game is just out, so we will just know a lot more about the future, because you're fixing all the bugs, as I hear. So that's really nice.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
If people also have some more questions, please feel free in the comments. Okay, so we have something really nice to announce. Max is going to give away one of the free Steam keys for Time on Frog Island, and he just wants to know, what is your favorite frog? So please, in the comments below, tell us who's your favorite frog, and then I will pick one of the names, and then you will receive maybe a free key for Time on Frog Island. So that would be exciting, right? Max, thank you very much for also this possibility, and I hope we can make someone happy with this. And thank you very much for having this interview. See you.
Thanks a lot.
See you somewhere else, I think, at some other event or whatsoever. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.